I'm sure people will still be coming in. And this is an experiment. I just felt like there needed to be at least a little time to have some dialogue. I know it's going to be hard with so many people on the same screen and everything. But thanks for attending the event. It was a joy to talk to the 4 panelists. I don't even know exactly how we want to do this. I see LaShawn and Susie are in right now. I know Maurice had a busy morning.
Maurice is here.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay, I can't even see everyone. All right. And Josh might be here too, and I don't see him. But feel free to talk to them. Again, it's a little weird, right? Like in a convention, you could all have your separate conversations, and we can't do that at the moment. But feel free to talk to them, and then don't even look to be called on or anything. I want it to be as free-flowing as possible.
Also, I just wanted to say hi, Susie.
Hi.
Hi, LaShawn.
Susie, I was wondering what middle grade titles you recommend. I rate middle grade fantasy, so I was curious.
Have you read Nancy Farmer's, gosh, I have a big pile of books here. Let's see where it is. The House of the Scorpion?
No.
Yeah, I really liked that. And it is a series. It was also a great audiobook. We did it via audio. And this is about, it's written for middle graders, but it definitely is dealing with a tricky issue. It's dealing with cloning. But I think it's totally appropriate for middle grade.
Cool. Thank you.
So it's a little sci-fi, because it's cloning.
Cool. Thank you.
LaShawn, not a question, but just wanted to say it was great to hear your voice again, because I used to listen to Escape Pod /Podcastle, and it got me through a lot of grad school, to be frank, at UW. And so I heard your voice, I was like, oh yeah, this brings me back. So thank you for that.
I miss doing those. So, but it was fun. It was fun. So Escape Pod, for everyone else, that Escape. So I used to be the associate editor of Podcastle, which is an online podcast doing fantasy, like reading fantasy. So Podcast was for the fantasy, Escape Pod is for the science fiction, and Pseudopod is for horror. So, and so far I have stories in both Escape Pod and Podcastle. Not quite Pseudopod yet, but yeah. Those are fun times.
Yep. I have all 3.
I have a question. I read a lot of science fiction and saw science fiction movies in the 60s when I was young. And that was at the height of the Cold War. One of the major fears of people at that time in the time was communism, and was communism going to take over the United States or the world? And if so, it was probably going to be one of 2 ways: either a traditional, us versus them invasion, or it was going to be a 5th column, and that was represented by movies where your body was somehow taken over, and you couldn't tell who was us and who was them. It could be your own neighbor, could be the alien. So I'm wondering, there was a lot of discussion about the current theme of science fiction being so dystopian. I'm wondering if the young writers have a lack of hope. And that's what's driving some of this.
Well, I mean, there is, to a degree, that might be the case. But I know that as of 2016, one of the first things that came down in 2016 was a bunch of editors and agents saying, hey, by the way, if you're writing a dystopia, it is dead on arrival. We just won't be publishing much of that moving forward for a while. So I think there's a lot of a lot of the writing just does speak to the time. And it's why I shifted to, instead of writing, I got so tired of dystopias. That's when I consciously shifted to, hey, you know what? Why don't I start thinking about better futures? What does that look like? And that's what's going to sustain me through today and into the next few years.
There's actually a new genre out now called hope punk, which is looking at more like trying to envision futures in a more positive way. And it's something that started, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember when. I think it started in the early 2000s because I remember I actually wrote a story for an anthology that was looking at hopeful futures. And for me, I've never really looked at dystopian or things like that. But I would say that in the most well-written dystopians, I've always found that glimmer of hope. So I don't know.
I think these things go in trends, and some of it is marketing. So if they find out that a certain kind of story is selling, sometimes you'll see like a train of them, and then there's some kind of shift. So maybe that's what we're seeing now.
I have a question for Maurice and LaShawn in particular. You both reflected a bit on Afrofuturism or Afro-pessimism, especially given the cultural impact. What are your reflections on Black Panther?
You want to go first?
You have the t-shirts.
Yeah, but actually today I'm wearing my Star Trek Deep Space Nine t-shirt. If I raise my camera just a little bit, you will see a row of Black Panther pop figures behind me. Black Panther was, all right, so I went to go see Black Panther 5 times while it was in theaters. And I only dressed up for the first 2. I will say that. I dressed up for the first 2 times I went to go see it. And I think what Black Panther was revelatory in several ways. So one, the reason I went to go see it so many times was occasion number 3 through 5. I was there actually to study the world building that went on in the movie. I was very interested in how they represented culture and how they brought together diverse cultures. Although someone might not even realize just how many diverse cultures were represented in Black Panther. And I wanted to just go ahead and study that. Another way it was revelatory was, one, it showed the power of a Black buying audience. So that was important and frankly, a watershed. Because sometimes Hollywood needs to be reminded that, Black people go see movies, Black people read sci-fi, just like it took Waiting to Exhale for people to realize, for the romance industry to go, wait, Black people read romance. So in that way, it was a watershed moment. And then also the other watershed moment was, hey, white people will go see movies and stories about Black people. And that was something that apparently Hollywood had not done the math on either. And so again, the whole idea of it being a copycat industry, hopefully that will open up doors and open up opportunities. I know that my most recent, the novel trilogy I talked about writing, I sold it literally on a pitch. Nothing had been written, but I said, I'm writing a book that is Black Panther meets The Expanse. And with that as the pitch, the whole trilogy sold.
Yeah, so for me, I actually saw it more from a consumer point of view because I only saw it 3 times. I actually wanted to see the movie in more of a Black audience kind of surroundings, and you just can't get that in Madison. I'm sorry. So I went to go see it in Chicago with my sister, and that was just a mind-blowing experience. So for me, I was more affected by the cultural aspect of it as opposed to the story building. But for me, it was really, really interesting that, it was just really interesting to see something that was, it's a superhero story, but it's also a Black story, and it's very unapologetically Black. And so it's, for me, I wanted to see how I can do that and what kind of stories could be told in the same way. For me, I actually, so the whole world building thing, I didn't do that with Black Panther. A few months after Black Panther came out, was another movie came out that was the revisioning of Madeline Lincoln's A Wrinkle in Time. Not many people remember that, but they came out in the same year. And that was something that I actually wound up watching several times in the theater because it re-envisioned Meg as a mixed girl. And her experience, that showed me, it's like, okay, what kind of things that would affect her as a, and how can you retell the story in that way? So that's where I got my learning from. And it's a great movie. It's an awesome movie. It was great to see my son like geeking out over it.
Jeffrey, it looks like you're trying to talk. I'm not hearing you. I don't know if others are. Yeah, sorry.
Can he write his question, potentially?
Yeah, Jeffrey, if you can type the question, I'll make sure it gets asked.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I had a question about faith as it relates to writing. Yeah, Maurice and LaShawn, you talked about your faith as it affects or informs the content of the stories that you tell. What about your faith as it relates to the creative process and your own identity as a writer and the time and energy and passion that you put into this, and how does that connect to your faith?
You want to go first, Maurice, or shall I?
You can.
Okay. So, writing's a discipline, and I actually am looking for a book that I have on this. Sorry. As you can tell, I'm a person who likes to refer to all the books that I have. And actually, I'm not seeing it. What the heck? Huh. I may have given it to someone. Oh wait, nope, found it. Sorry. I'm going to have to actually turn off my camera because otherwise you guys will see my butt and you don't want to see that. So give me a moment here.
Should I start answering?
Yeah, go for it, Maurice.
Why don't you answer?
So writing is a discipline and it does take up a lot of time. And I did at one point almost wreck my entire marriage and family life over writing. And so which was pivotal for a lot of ways. So, I mean, it caused me to have to rebalance, reprioritize my life. In fact, including my faith. So, I'd made a mess of my life, and then it's like, all right, well, let me start reconstituting these things. And so it caused me to re-examine my faith. And so I started rebuilding my faith around the idea of, all right, what does my faith mean to me? What does that look like? And so I built it around, all right, well, Jesus said the most important things are love God, love each other. Why don't I start there with my faith in terms of what has meaning for me? So I started there, and then I was like, all right, so let me put in the pieces of my life, building around that. So then family then became my new priority, which it hadn't been, if I'm going to be honest. Let me add family in at that point, and then build in writing, and then all of a sudden, my life gets reconstituted around in that sort of orbit. And then that being said, so the discipline now, whereas it used to be I would isolate myself in a space much like this and just stay here for hours with the voices in my head and building worlds and everything. Now the bulk of my writing space is actually on my front porch. And I call that my interruptible time. I mean, there's times like now when I'm in my office, which is non-interruptible time, which is why you don't see a half-naked teenager bouncing through here, which I only narrowly averted just a few minutes ago. But on my front porch, that's my interruptible time. So my mom can come out, and even though it looks like I'm just daydreaming, Mom, I'm actually working, but she is free to interrupt me during those times. My kids can interrupt me during this time because I want to do my writing process now in as much community as possible. I don't want to just be isolated. And I want to have people speak into my writing as much as possible. I had to have a series of conversations with my pastor saying, it's not that I'm ignoring you during your sermons, but I'm engaging your sermons in a whole different way. Yes, I'm literally writing my stories while in church during your sermons. I absolutely am. But it's because I want to have your words, I want to be engaging in your words literally as a part of my process. And so that's been interesting also, it's like, as I'm writing, and I have words of faith, being spoken in the background. How do I weave that into my work? Or actually, how does it get woven into me and then through me woven into my work? And so it's this interesting, delicate dance that writing and my faith have now become in a more conscious way.
All right. And for me, I actually have the book that's been helping me a lot. So it's Soul Tells a Story, which is a great book by Vanita Hampton Wright. So it is she's a Christian writer, but a lot of what she suggests, excuse me, a lot of what she writes about brings a lot of spiritual formation and processes into the act of thinking about creativity and things of that nature. So I incorporate a lot of her suggestions when I am crafting my own stories and thinking about story. In fact, and I actually try to reread this like every couple years or so. In fact, I'm probably due to do it again. But yeah, for me, I feel like my writing tends to go in waves. There'll be times when I will have this huge burst of creativity. It's like I can write all the things. I can do it. I totally can. And then there'll be times when I'd be like, I can't, and that's okay too, because for me, it's a season where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna trust that right now I need to rest. I need to basically focus on my, health. But at the same time, even though I may not feel like I'm being creative, those seeds are still being planted within me, so that when the time comes that I am feeling a lot more creative, they'll just come up. So, and that in itself is kind of like, it's almost like how God works, and yeah. So it's just another amazing way how he uses creativity to reveal himself.
I have one thing to add, really specific, that happened to me this week. My husband and I have a prayer room, and I was in the prayer room praying as I do in the mornings before I write. And this one character in my novel has kind of been bugging me. And I think God basically told me, yeah, you need to change this one thing about him. So that after that prayer time, I went right into my novel and changed. I had to go through my 100,000 words and change this one thing about this character. But I think it's better. I think it's stronger. So maybe that answers the question in a very specific way.
I want to give voice to the first question in the chat. I know Nathan asked this in one of the sessions as well. Any four of you have any thoughts on if COVID-19 will have an influence on the genre, or it certainly will, but maybe what the influence might be?
All right, so I have a couple of different answers for that. So one of the impacts has been my novel got bumped to 2022 instead of 2021. So that was immediate impact of COVID. And then the other thing, and so there are these sort of bottlenecks that are happening in terms of production across the board, across the entertainment industry. So I mean, there is that. And then the ongoing conversation with a lot of artists has been, you know, how much do we write the pandemics into our current works? And so, like, for example, I have a middle grade novel coming out next year. Do I write that into the middle grade novel? Or do I write that into my science fiction novel? I know that I've answered that question with no, I didn't write it into the middle grade novel, and then into the science fiction novel. I mean, I also have a background as a scientist. I was a scientist for 20 years. So the idea of a virus being a possible annihilation event has always been on the horizon for me. So I mean, I've always sort of factored that into a lot of the works that I do. And so, so for me, folks in a lot of my futures have already been wearing masks for a variety of reasons anyway. So now they're just filtering out all sorts of things, from pollution to microbes. So, but these are the conversations that are going on because each person has to answer these sort of questions for themselves and for their work moving forward. So.
Yeah. When I wrote the Sister Rosetta Tharpe story, that was back in 2016, and I had no clue that there was going to be an epidemic. But in the story, there's basically an epidemic, and people are wearing masks, and there are quarantines. So when that happened this year, I literally freaked out because it's like, I wrote about it and now it came true. Oh dear God, I have all this power. What? Quick, I need to write something happy so the happiness can come back. So, yeah. And I do see that there will be some influence. I mean, writers write what they know. But at the same time, you know, it's also trends. Yeah, it all depends. I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, I look at like Paul Tremblay, who's a horror writer, just launched his latest book is called Survivor Song, which wrestles with a pandemic, and so which, you know, good luck with that marketing, but you know, but I mean, pandemics has always been a feature in like horror novels or end of the world novels, and so one of the other things has been, you know, even with our current times, is like, all right, what did we get wrong when we're writing about these sort of scenarios? And there's a whole lot we got wrong. If I would have known, I would have been spending so much time in my pajamas. I mean, that's a whole new rewrite for some of my books.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Maurice. I just think about we all have lived through it, but thinking about just the sort of moving uncertainty of like the immediate future is something that's probably very hard to put into a novel or into any type of fiction. It's sort of like a low grade stress that isn't, I don't know, it's hard to represent, I guess. But anyway, it was something as we were going through it here at Upper House and just in our lives, I was thinking like, oh, the stuff about pandemics didn't really capture just the mundane day-to-day like grind of not knowing you know, what's coming next. So I think about that, thinking of like the Contagion type movies where it's this really rapid, deadly thing, and how that's not what we went through. It was a different experience for most people.
Right.
We just have a few more minutes here. I really want to respect the time of of our panelists. They've been with us now for almost 3 hours. So just a few more people, if you can jump in with your questions.
Hey, Dan, I had a question. Sorry that my video's washed out here with my sunlight, but we talked about Afrofuturism, Afro-pessimism, other forms of dystopianism and utopianism. I'm also curious about the tropes in the genre itself as sort of a historiography of sci-fi writing, that there's a lot of racism and sexism and fascinations with fascism and colonial attitudes and that kind of thing. So I'm curious about the tension of drawing on renowned works that are really successful that can maybe inform how we write and how we think, and then also trying to undo some of that and challenging them, and the balance between drawing on them as inspiration, but also feeling the need to challenge them. How do you balance that in your work and in your criticism?
So no, give me a second. Anyway, all right, LaShawn, could you answer this real quick?
Yeah. So I would say that I'm thinking about how one of the things that I've always considered science fiction to be is that it's an ongoing conversation, and that there are great ideas that are introduced by authors who have also been problematic in the past. We just, if anybody has followed the Hugo Awards, that just Google 2020 Hugo Awards. That in itself was so, but that is, I bring it up because George R. Martin was the Toastmaster, and he would bring up, and he basically used the Hugos to talk about all these great people, these great writers who are all basically white, all men, all heterosexual, some who were very, very problematic. But it was interesting in that the winners of this year's Hugos were a lot of people who were not in that category. And so a lot of women, a lot of queer folk, a lot of trans folk, who are writing stories that kind of address the same issues, but from their own perspective. And not saying that, they're, nobody's perfect, but in a way, having a diverse reading style enables you to see a problem from not just one perspective. And okay, Maurice, take over.
Okay, so I look at the history of the canon, of the so-called canon, for example, and I look at some of the science fiction writers who have explored theology in their works. I mean, some of the classic artists like Arthur C. Clarke. He had a short story, The 9 Billion Names of God, and he had one called The Star. Here in town, I actually sit on the board of the Ray Bradbury Center, and he had a story called The Man, which was basically what does it look like when Jesus is popping up on all sorts of different planets, carrying out his same mission work, his same 3-year mission, just on different planets. He's born, he dies, he gets resurrected, then moves on to the next star system, which I thought was a fascinating story. So you have that, which again, I'm sure these authors all had their problematic areas. For me, where I become in conversation with them, though, I'm going to use the example of H.P. Lovecraft. He was mostly known for writing cosmic horror, which is this very existential branch of horror, which by its very nature, I mean, and is always wrestling with this mythology that he created, which revolves around these elder gods. So there's this huge theological imprint. It's considered foundational work, and it's very influential in the horror and fantasy circles. However, it's fundamentally racist. The whole elder god mythology was built on his fear of the other, and his other started with Black people, and then turns out he just was afraid of everybody. And so, but this whole fear of the other is the foundation of his work. And so you're like, all right, so how do I, as an artist who's working in the shadow of this foundational work, how do I reconcile that with the work that I'm trying to do? And so how do I engage in conversation with him and his work, and then with me where I am? And so I look at the work of Victor Laval with The Ballad of Black Tom, how he directly engages H.P. Lovecraft. And I've been engaging Lovecraft in several fantasy stories. In fact, I just finished one where I literally took one of his stories and I just redo the entire story, except I have the central cast being a group of hip hop artists. And now, how does telling his story through the eyes and lens of hip hop artists, how does that change what he was trying to do? Whereas his was the big fear of the other, and whereas with my story, I'm like, no, you created the other, you have otherized these people, and because of that, certain systems have now come into place. And so that's the conversation I now have with him through my work. And so there is that tension of us as newer writers wrestling with the canon of work, because we had no say in defining that canon. So it is this ongoing conversation that we just continue to have, I guess.
And there's actually also there's a show out now too, I think on HBO, that also addresses Lovecraft, but from a Black perspective.
Lovecraft.
Yep, I wish I had HBO because it looks amazing. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, even before Lovecraft Country came out, that's Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, I believe. Even before then, I mean, what HBO's seminal work was Watchmen, which is again reimagining of the comic book series from the 80s. Whereas with the comic books, again, kind of coming full circle on our conversation, the central fear in the 80s was the Russians and nuclear annihilation. But then Watchmen reimagines, the story taking place these days. Well, now what is our central fear? And it all deals with over-policing and institutional racism. And so, and in those terms, Watchmen end up being actually about six months to a year prescient on imagining what life is going to be like these days. So again, it's just a matter of how are we wrestling with it in the moment with our voices.
Thank you all. We're actually a few minutes past noon Central, and this has been a delight. This is exactly what we were all hoping here at Upper House would be the conversation. Thank you so much to the 4 panelists. If you jump onto upperhouse.org and go to our event page for this event, we have links out to all 4 of them, sort of their presence online, some of their publications, and so hopefully today has made you interested in following them and learning more about what they're doing on a regular basis. So thank you, LaShawn and Maurice and Josh and Susie. Have a good rest of your day, and go in peace.
Thank you, Dan, and Upper House as well.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Great.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.